Hi, welcome to our webinar on effective therapy via video tips, top tips we've developed together that we'd like to share with you. My name's Helen Pote. I'm chair of the Digital Healthcare Subcommittee for the Division of Clinical Psychology.
Hello everybody, I'm Alesia Moulton Perkins. I'm a clinical psychologist and a CBT therapist, and I'm secretary for the committee, the Digital Healthcare Committee. I'm also currently working at the University of Surrey and in private practice, seeing clients online.
Okay, we've got about half an hour today, and we're going to run you through some top tips that the committee has come up with to enable you to work most effectively online. And we're going to take this in a video recorded webinar where I'll pose some interesting questions to Alesia, and she'll try and reflect on her own current practice as well as share some of the ideas of the committee with you.
The current crisis has brought about a number of changes to our practice. One of these has been the more widespread use of digital technology. Now, some of us have been enthusiastic about this approach for a while and have been using technology to deliver therapy. But for most, this is new, and there's a steep learning curve. We don't yet know how many of the changes in place at the moment will carry on, but it might be that those new to this technology in their work might keep doing some of this. There's already quite a good body of evidence on the effectiveness and potential of using a whole variety of digital technologies in healthcare, including in psychology, summarised recently in the Topol report. This is now coming to the attention of more people as we start to use it more and more. The other thing that's happening more recently is there's a lot of sharing of good practice on how you actually start using this technology in your practice as a psychologist. This webinar is a handy summary of some top tips on how you get started in delivering psychological interventions via video. And it's been developed by the members of the DCP Digital Healthcare Subcommittee.
So let's get going straight away with our first question, Alesia, which is, how on earth do I get going with online work at all?
Okay, well I suppose it really will depend on what setting you're in. So if you're in an NHS trust or you're in private practice, because whatever you're doing, you're going to need to take some kind of steer from your organisational policies and procedures. So there might be certain platforms that are mandated in your organisation. But even if you're in private practice and you can choose what platform to use to connect with your clients, you still need to refer to sort of good practice guidelines and make sure it's secure, etc. So I suppose that's the first thing, is deciding, what are the policies you have to follow, and what is the platform you're going to use. And if you haven't got any policies or procedures to guide your practice, and I know some people maybe in organisations where they're having to implement delivering therapy very, very rapidly without a lot of guidance. So there's always the NHS X guidance on information governance, which I think is really useful to look at. And if you're in that situation where you're having to make a decision, just do a risk assessment. You're going to have to make your own professional decision about what are the relative risks and benefits of using having to use a platform that maybe you don't know whether it's mandated or not, whether it's how secure that platform is. You're going to have to make your own assessment, and and bearing in mind that if you decide not to offer something because you are unsure about the security of that online platform, then there is a risk to that as well, that your client might not get a service. So that's one thing. I think ideally, in the perfect world, you'd have clear policy. There'd be a clear platform for you to use. You'd be trained. You'd have had training in how to do online work. You'd have a supervisor that's expert in online work. Or if you haven't got those things, you'd have at least seen the client face to face, first of all. But the problem is not everybody has that luxury, and some people are having to get going even without any of those things. So hopefully this webinar will provide you with some tips about how to get going. So you know, just a simple thing like choosing an adequate platform. So I personally use Zoom. That's my preferred platform, and I've looked into the security of it myself, and I am fairly you know, secure in the idea that it is as secure, I think, as any of the other platforms. But then I'm not a cybersecurity expert, so I've had to make my own professional judgment there. Another thing that you can do, which is just the simple thing of like getting a version of the platform and having a play around yourself, just open it up and click around and feel confident, you know, that you know how to mute yourself or unmute yourself and the audio works. And
sometimes that's easier with professional colleagues when you're starting off before you start the work with clients, isn't it?
Indeed, yes. You don't want to be ideally going on your very first video call with a client, not having a clue about how it works. Try to do it with colleagues first of all, yeah. Or even if you just do it on your own is better than nothing, because you can just open, for example, a Zoom call on your own. You don't even have to have another person in it. You can find out a lot of, you know, of the aspects of the functions just on your own. Yeah.
And I remember when we first started talking online, because we have all of our meetings virtually, we were advisors to each other. You know, each time we'd use Zoom or another sort of online platform, we'd give a few tips and hints of how to enhance the use of the functions and things we might try. And so I think just giving it a go with friends or colleagues initially is really helpful in just developing your skills, rather than thinking you've got to perfect your skills before you start doing anything.
Indeed, yes, yeah. You don't have to be perfect at this. And I think if you've got a good therapeutic alliance with your client, they'll forgive you a few technical glitches, you know.
Yeah. And as you mentioned, the NHSX guidance is really helpful and quite broad in terms of the platforms that it's recommending. And that's been quite helpful for people whose trusts have maybe been a bit slower to offer guidance into what's suitable for use.
Yes, indeed, yeah.
How about some of the practicalities of getting going then, in terms of setting up your space so it's safe and secure?
Yeah, so I mean, I think a really fundamental thing is the internet connection. So I've always really tried to make sure I'm using Ethernet. So I plug in, like, you know, one of those sort of they look a bit like a telephone cable. If you know what an Ethernet connection is. Now, you know, I'm lucky that I actually got that installed in my house, in my office, but not everybody will have that facility, and they'll just be reliant on Wi-Fi. So the next best option to get a good internet connection is if you can plug directly into your home hub. You know, there'll be some sort of box that comes in, you know, where which basically transmits the Wi-Fi signal throughout the house, but that will actually have Ethernet ports in the back of it, and you can plug into that. Now, if that's no good because that's in a room where other family members use that room, which is the case for many of us, then the next best option is if you can get one of those booster plugs, and you could plug into that. So it like boosts the Wi-Fi connection throughout the house, but you can also sometimes get them that have like, you can plug in. And then if that's still not possible, then just trying to, you know, maximize your Wi-Fi signal as much as you can by switching off any or turning off any devices that are using bandwidth. So actually like putting your phone or other devices on airplane mode, closing any browser windows down or any other applications on your desktop which are kind of churning away in the background, downloading stuff, like, so for example, Dropbox or Skype might be constantly updating itself.
Yeah, or even your TV box can sometimes interfere. So
yeah, and if you've got other people in the household using the internet, if you can like negotiate with them, like you know, if you've got an important call with a client and you know that your internet is a bit dodgy anyway, and you've got some kid, you know, your kids like want to be watching Netflix, trying to bribe them or something not to watch Netflix at that time, because that is going to really put a lot of strain on the internet connection. And if that's a client you're speaking to who's quite distressed, you really don't want it to go down in the middle of a therapy session.
And whatever's happening for you in terms of these internet connectivity problems will also be happening for your clients. So maybe just giving them a bit of warning, a reminder of some of the things they can do to make sure that they've got a good connection with you during the session can be helpful at the start.
Yeah, and I always provide my clients with sort of an information sheet with these kind of things on it so that they know how to get prepared for the session.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and how about the room? Because we've got backdrops here on this webinar to conceal our untidy rooms that we're sitting in. How would you advise people go about making sure their room is a good therapeutic space, I guess?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to actually show you now what my background looks like without my virtual background. So the BPS have provided us with this very lovely professional background. I actually normally see my clients like this. That's my natural background, which I don't think is too bad. Yes, it's relatively clutter-free. But, you know, you could get a virtual background like that if you wanted to make it even more professional. Yeah.
Many available just to download on the internet very easily and free.
Yeah, indeed. So just make sure your background is professional, but actually even more probably important than that, the worst thing you can do is if you sit with a light source behind you. So don't sit with a window behind you, because then your face will be in shadow and your client won't be able to see your face. And that's really matters with therapy, because if you were to build a warm rapport with your client, they need to be able to see you and you need to be able to see them. And that being able to have good lighting, have a good, not be too far away from the screen, those sorts of things help with what's called telepresence, which has been shown to relate positively to the therapeutic alliance.
Okay, thanks, Alicia. Well, let's move on. We've got some slides that accompany this that we're running through, which give some more detail on what we've been talking about. One of the things Alicia mentioned was about giving her clients a briefing, written briefing before therapy starts. But it's also a good idea to actually run through that with your client, especially in the first session. Just to give them a mini tutorial of the software, ensuring that they're really familiar with it and that they've got a good connection and are in a confidential space. And we'll come on to that in a minute now. But they might well be nervous initially about the technology, about any recordings, for example, that they fear might be made during the session. So it's really important you give them written information on that and an opportunity at the start of the session to consider that with you and ask questions.
Yeah, and that's all part of the contracting process, actually.
Okay, so let's move on to think about consent and confidentiality then. What do we need to consider specifically when we're working online compared to face-to-face work?
Okay, so, when I'm taking consent from my clients, so consent to engage in therapy, and therapy specifically online, is in my contract written that they are signing up to, but I also go over this verbally. I talk about the risks and the benefits, or the pros and the cons of seeing me through, video call. So I say, I go over the benefits, like it means that you don't have to travel, you can be in the comfort of your own home, but there are some drawbacks. So I'm not able to see, their full body, I can't see their body language. So, they have to understand that there will be some drawbacks to this particular way of working, such as the internet going down, etc. And so once we've gone over that, they really can give their informed consent to proceed. And I've just noticed you've changed your slides there. Oh, I can see you've got the same desktop as I have, actually.
Sorry.
It's a Mac desktop.
Be careful not to fiddle.
Yeah, so that they're giving their informed consent. And then issues around consent more broadly about, you know, consent to share information, who do you speak to? That's all very much like your standard practice, really, is that, you know, the bounds of confidentiality, limits of confidentiality, etc., would operate very similarly to face-to-face. So if your client is receiving a NHS service and has like a care coordinator or another, you know, psychiatrist working with them, then, you know, you need to agree how are you going to be in, you know, keeping those people informed, like the GP, etc. If you have their consent to do that. So really just, you know, making sure that, you know, that is all clarified as you would in a face-to-face appointment. Yeah. In terms of things specific to online, I suppose one situation, and this is probably only likely to happen for people working in private practice or people who are working maybe in an NHS national service where they take referrals from across the country, is when, or possibly abroad, is the situations where you are working with people at a great distance from you. So if your clients are in a totally different area of the country or in another country, you need to understand about the legal jurisdiction over that country. You need to understand who and what are the support systems for that client in that area. So you've got kind of legal professional liability issues to cover, but then you've got the care and the duty of care to your client. If they go into crisis, and, you know, you're on a video call and they're 300 miles away, and say, for example, you're worried about their imminent safety, you need to have made sure ahead of time that you know what help you can call upon if that person goes into crisis. Yeah. So
I think that's the thing that people are most often worried about, isn't it, in terms of remotely being able to manage that risk. And it's about carefully setting that up at the start, making sure you've got good contact numbers, and you're sort of very aware of that and have agreed that with the client, that that's going to be the procedure that you'll be following.
Yeah, so I mean, I collect that information as standard when I see my clients and get their consent to collect and hold that information. Yeah.
Okay.
So, oh, I just saw something else on that
okay,
slide, which you just reminded me. If you just go back a minute. So in terms of like having privacy and confidentiality, is making sure that you're in a room where you can't be overheard and there aren't other family members or other people, maybe just off the screen, yeah, who are possibly listening, or maybe there's a coercive relationship going on in a situation of domestic violence. So, you know, I always check at the beginning of therapy with a new client, you know, are you in a private room? There's nobody else there, you know, you're overheard at all. And I also reassure them that I'm doing the same thing, that I'm in a private room. That's why I use earbuds, not only because it often improves sound quality, but I also do this because it just protects the confidentiality of my clients a little bit more. That you know, if anybody is outside the room in my house, then they're not going to hear the client because I've got these on. Yeah.
Okay, let's move on and just think a little bit more about, sorry, my assessments, because I think particularly for psychologists, we tend to use quite structured assessment process. We rely on that process for guiding our work and treatment plan. And are there some things we need to think about how assessments are different, maybe both sort of interview assessments and psychometric assessments when we're conducting those online?
In many ways they're very similar. That you know, you do a clinical interview, and if your practice includes administering questionnaires, then you can still administer those questionnaires. It's just you have to think about the technology to support the administration of them. So are you going to send like a link to an online questionnaire, or are you going to email them a Word document or a PDF that they fill out and then email back to you? But because you are completely reliant on getting your information through electronic means, there are more concern, you know, you have to think more about security and the client's privacy. So if they are emailing you back a questionnaire, you know, probably putting into place a password at the very minimum would be a good idea. So, you know, more thought needs to go into that, really.
I really try and avoid emailing for that reason. I think in terms of questionnaires, sometimes it's, even though I can be slightly worried about sort of the administration of doing something online, I feel like it's safer if you've got it on a secure platform than just emailing material.
Yeah. So then what you can do is you can just read out the questions, or what you can do is you can do it live with the client where you share screen. So like we're sharing screen now, you can share the questions with them and then you just write them down on a piece of paper or however. I mean, I personally use CoreNet, which is, you know, the core questionnaire, like Core 34. There's a platform where you can administer it electronically, securely, and they get emailed a link, and that really works well for me. Yeah. Any other issues about?
Okay.
Oh, I've just remembered something. There's a sort of a limitation to online assessments, is that you can't actually pick up on all those non sort of verbal signals that you would have if you were meeting face to face. So if somebody's been drinking alcohol, for example, you're not going to smell it. Or if somebody's self-neglecting, you know, with their, you know, their personal hygiene, you wouldn't be aware of that necessarily. But on the other hand, there might be other things that you are able to pick up on that you wouldn't if you met them in the clinic, is you're going to see into their homes. So you might be seeing things in their background, which you can build into your assessment and formulation.
Yeah. And you just need to think about sensitively asking some of those things that you would normally pick up on non-verbally, and introducing those through the conversation, I guess, being a bit more explicit about some of those things than you might do face to face. Okay. Anything else on assessments, or should we move on to think about interventions? Because I know this is something that's been coming up quite a lot in our conversations in the committee recently. It's about how the sort of therapeutic relationship might be affected by online working. Is it the same? Are there, you know, is it poorer? Can we maintain a good therapeutic relationship with our clients?
Yeah. So there is quite a bit of evidence now to suggest that the therapeutic relationship through video call is very similar. It's virtually the same as face to face. But there are certain things you can do to promote the therapeutic relationship. I've already mentioned them, to promote telepresence, sort of being the right distance away from the camera, for example. So basically about an arm's length from the screen, from the camera, will mean that you are close enough so that they can get a good look at your face. And, you know, good sound quality will make a difference to being able to form a bond with the person. And actually, interestingly, there is some evidence to suggest that the therapeutic relationship, or at least emotional disclosure, can happen more rapidly through online means. There's this thing called the online disinhibition effect, where people may process strong emotions more quickly and be able to disclose more. And there may be certain client groups who actually feel more comfortable in this particular environment for whatever reason, and therefore are more able to disclose and form a bond with their therapist. My personal experience is I really do think that we have just as a you know, warm bond, and clients are able to express their feelings and find catharsis through you know, being able to cry and to talk about what they need to talk about. I really honestly do not see, you know, that it has impacted negatively.
Especially as they relax into it, just as we're nervous when we first start working in this modality, so is the clients. And as they relax into it, just as in any therapeutic relationship, your connection grows. It is a little bit a matter of practice in terms of your telepresence and the therapeutic relationship, just like when you're practicing it in face-to-face. I remember in my first few meetings online, and I'm still guilty of it now, I'm a terrible fidget. I don't experience that so much when I'm in a therapy room. I find that I can relax, but if I'm at a desk here with lots of things going on, fingertips,
totally.
I can easily get distracted, and that will interfere with the therapeutic relationship. So you've got to set the room up for yourself in a way that removes distractions for yourself, so you can totally engage in the client and encourage them to do the same.
Yeah, indeed. Actually, let me just ask you, Helen, have you noticed that throughout our conversation I've been fiddling with something in my hands?
No, I haven't.
You haven't? You see, you didn't notice that?
Yeah, but I think you're better than me at looking at the camera. Like, so you're very fixed. Your eye contact's very fixed at the camera, whereas mine really wanes throughout meetings. And that's something you've practiced, you've improved upon. So I think it is a matter of getting some of those things right and noticing what you're doing as a therapist that might be impacting on the engagement.
And that is something that I have done. I've done training in how to be an online therapist, and one of the things they taught us in the beginning is a very simple tip how to maintain eye contact with your client is you position the thumbnail of your client right underneath the camera, which can help with a therapeutic alliance. So it looks like you're looking at each other.
Okay, I'm doing that now. I'm moving you right into the middle and see, because otherwise, actually, if your eye contact's getting distracted, it's really off-putting for the client. So I think it is important.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else on therapeutic engagement?
I think, I've worked both with sort of older people and even people who've had like a brain injury or some kind of level of cognitive impairment. And I've also worked with much younger people, children through this method. And what you can find is then sort of like the technology can be a bit trickier. So some people, if they've got cognitive impairment, it is harder for them to manage, opening up a meeting link or logging onto a platform. Or with a young person, they might need the assistance of a parent. And sometimes you have to be more flexible in those circumstances. So although, me as a professional, I've looked into the security of various different platforms and I've made my selection based on my own risk assessment, and I use Zoom, right? But, I have, there might be one of my clients, and this has happened in the past, where they can't use it independently. They've got some cognitive difficulties or developmentally, it's not appropriate. So I've had to go with the platform that they feel comfortable with, that they are able to use independently. And that might be FaceTime or Google Hangouts or something that you might think, oh, that's not so secure. But then if you explain the risks and benefits to the client and they consent, that's what you have to make your decision about. If I say no, then they don't get a service at all.
Okay, so let's just think about some of the ways we can use interactive tools that are available on some of these platforms, because I think that really can increase the collaborative elements and improve the therapeutic relationship. What have you found helpful?
Oh yeah, I use the whiteboard on Zoom all the time, because my particular model is I specialise in CBT and third wave approaches, so I'm always drawing out formulations or making notes with the client. So I use the whiteboard a lot. And I'm starting to experiment with a new separate kind of whiteboard called Miro. And that might be good for people if they're not using Zoom, for example. They could have this separate interactive whiteboard that both client and therapist can both be adding to. And I'm sure there's millions of other products as well. So that I find really important. Other interactive things, you can use the chat window as well. So, for example, if you want to quickly share a YouTube video or a document, you can put that into the chat window.
Really good for setting agendas at the start of meetings with clients as well, isn't it? And maybe sort of putting homework tasks in there that you've focused on the week before. You can pop those in before the meeting starts, so you can easily refer to them.
Indeed, yes. And I've also, what else have I done? I also use sort of Google Docs where, so for example, maybe we're doing like an activity schedule or an ERP hierarchy. If somebody's got, OCD, then we might have, their hierarchy on a Google Excel, an Excel spreadsheet held in Google Docs. So we use that same link for that piece of work. And, we can be, both of us, looking at Google Docs live together and working on it together, and commenting on it. And they can then go away and do that for homework afterwards. Yeah.
You get people submitting things between sessions, because I know if you're using formula, sort of formal programs such as Silver Cloud or something like that, you might get people submitting things between sessions. But would you do that ordinarily in your sessions, Alesia?
Yeah, I mean, as a CBT therapist, we, homework is the kind of like the holy grail, isn't it? And you're always trying to encourage your clients to do homework. So yes, they might send me something that they've done. I'm just thinking about recently, I've had a client where we agreed that they were going to do a survey to test one of their beliefs about a certain situation, and they were going to create a survey on SurveyMonkey.
Yeah.
And then send me the link, and I was going to administer it to my colleagues who.
Okay.
And indeed, this client has done that, and so she sent me the survey link that she designed, and yeah, so it's really nice that we can do that together. I think it really sort of makes the therapy more effective. Yeah, but you have to, of course, contract that at the beginning with your client about what are the expectations around between session contact.
Yeah, and that's important, is if you're going to adapt any of the sort of usual boundaries of the weekly face-to-face session for the benefit of therapy, for the benefit of clients, it's important to think about that and how you build that into the expectations, isn't it, from the start?
Yeah. And I've gone to a lot of trouble to very carefully select what email server I use, and I have my own procedure around emails contact with clients to try and make it as secure as possible, and also agree with them about what their what are the expectations around how quickly I respond to them, etc. Yeah, so these things, they're all very powerful tools, but it does take quite a bit of thought and planning ahead of time.
Yeah. And something we always talk to our trainees about as well is making sure your online presence, if you're Googled at any point by your clients, is really clearly professional and secure, because people are tempted to do that when they're working in the online medium, perhaps more regularly than when they're working with you face to face.
Indeed, yeah, that's called therapist targeted Googling. And I've actually just finished supervising a trainee. They're doing their doctoral research on that, about how, patients Google therapists, and how therapists sometimes Google their patients, and that's a real no-no, by the way.
Yeah.
And that features in our digital competencies.
Yes, yeah. Okay, which we'll come back to at the end. Just wanted to think about developmentally appropriate things now.
Yeah, I mean, I mainly work with adults, and I do work a little bit with adolescents mainly. But I know that your background is basically with children and young people, isn't it, Helen? I mean, this is maybe a question that might be, if you wouldn't mind commenting on, actually, because I think you've probably got more experience in this area than I have.
Yeah. So if we're seeing children online, is there anything different to consider, I guess? And I've been working with the Children and Young People's faculty. They've produced some really helpful additional guidance on this above and beyond our top tips, and I'd refer you to that. But I guess there are three key themes that are coming up in that guidance in terms of working with young people. The first is about choice and consent. You know, young people often aren't referring themselves for work. They may be referred by a family member or a teacher or another professional. And so if you're working online with them, really carefully checking their choice of that methodology is important, and making sure they consent on a regular basis to that. So revisiting that each session, and that it isn't just that their parents that have consented to that, you know, format. Okay, and I can hear my children in the background, so I'm just going to shut the door. Okay.
That's an aspect of online working, isn't it? We have to work from home.
We have to work from home, and we're in self-isolation at the moment.
Yeah.
So. Yeah. The other thing, I guess, is about carefully checking the family's context or home situation, because you're going to be seeing them in their home. You're going to have siblings or whoever running around in the session, and you really need to make sure that they're going to have a confidential space. And it's much more usual for adults to ask for privacy and a space to work than it is for young people. So making sure you've been very clear with their parents, if you're working with the young people individually, that they need to respect that confidential space for the young person, and just asking the young person whether they're in a space where no one else is in the room when you start the session and throughout is important. And things move on quickly in families, and it's really important at the start of each session to just say what's been happening for your family and what's changed, and will that affect our work and how we're working together online. Because it's different if you're just calling in than if, you know, there's been a major family crisis. Then it's likely that they wouldn't turn up to therapy in a different way to if you just called into the session. So they might be more likely to still engage with you during some family crises, and it's important to check that out with them. And the final thing, I guess, relates to the collaborative tools we just talked about, which is really keeping that creative and playful element to the therapeutic work that's important with young people. So using all the online tools that you can, especially the whiteboard, for making sure you keep play and drawings are key parts of the engagement process. Just because you're working online doesn't mean you have to rely more on language. And the, you know, not relying on language is really important when you're working with younger children. And so to just think creatively about how you set up the online space to ensure you can still be creative. And I guess what we're talking about with adults or children is how we can create a safe and containing space for people. You know, that it feels safe and containing just as it would in the therapy room. And so, you know, if there are interruptions, to deal with those sensitively, apologise like you would if someone knocked on your therapy door, and reassure people that it is going to be a confidential space and you've asked someone to move away, etc. And children might be even more anxious about that, especially if they're disclosing things that are happening in their family over which they have little control. So setting that up is really important. But I'd really refer you to their top tips in relation to children and young people. And we've also got our own top tips on which this webinar is based. And you can find them all on the BPS Division of Clinical Psychology website. And also on our digitalhealthskills.com website, which is where we put all the work from our committee on. And one of the things we've got on there at the moment that we're working on are a set of competencies for practitioners who are working online, not just using video links, but in terms of using apps or other forms of digital work with clients, And we're hoping that these competencies get rolled out as a training program for all psychological professions. And we've been supported by the BPS to develop some e-learning based on this, which will be coming later in the year. So just to encourage everyone to go online, give us some feedback on those competencies at digitalhealthskills.com, so that we can make sure that what we're recommending in terms of teaching you in relation to digital practice is the sort of things that you'd like to learn about. And we've got a short 10-minute survey on there for everyone to complete.
Yeah, and at the end of today's presentation, we'll show those that website and the link for you. You'll be able to see it in the webinar in a moment when we finish.
So is there anything you wanted to add, Alesia, to conclude the top tips for today?
Yeah, I would just say, go for it. It might feel a bit scary to begin with because it's a new way of working, but actually it's not so much different from face to face. It's not half as hard as you think it might be, and just to have a go. And if you do make a few mistakes with the technology or something in the beginning, I'm sure your client will forgive you, and just be open with them and see it as like you're probably learning together a little bit about how to manage these new ways of communicating with other people. Although if you've got maybe some young people these days, probably this is more familiar to them than almost sort of meeting face to face. They're happiest online. So actually, they might be able to do it very, very well, and that might be reassuring for you. So you don't have to worry so much about being the expert all the time.
Yeah, I mean, thanks so much for your thoughts, Alesia. I'd echo what you've said. Just give it a go. We're all making mistakes with it all of the time, and sometimes that's helpful modelling for your clients, that it's okay to get a few things wrong, as long as you keep that safe and containing space for them. Okay, thanks so much again, and for everyone for joining in to the webinar. We'll put up the links on the next slide. Thanks so much.
Thanks. Bye.